We've got two options. We either go up or we go out. It is important to have relationships. People need to know that you are a reasonable person.
Over the last 18 months, we've seen the largest regional migration in Australia's history. Not a lot of people understand that.
Things take time to change,
Yes.
but the message has been received loud and clear. When it doesn't work, you do have to be prepared to have some really difficult conversations.
The best leaders are the ones who can have the difficult conversations.
There's going to be some change.
Rebecca Vonhoff, welcome to the Hot Property Podcast.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
You're most welcome. I'm really excited for this episode and going to talk Toowoomba, we're going to talk growth, we're going to talk opportunities and also challenges that the Toowoomba Region faces. But firstly, for those who don't know you in our Deputy Mayor position, tell us a little bit about the Rebecca Vonhoff story and how you ended up where you are now.
Rebecca Vonhoff story. So I am a mum to 3 children and I'm a wife. My family is from here and our family farm, we still have our family farm and we've had it for 147 years.
Wow,
yeah,
that's so cool.
Yeah, so I know that the responsibility for organising the 150th is going to fall to me. So I've got to start to that's where my mind's at.
Yeah.
And I grew up here, but I left after I finished high school and I lived in Brisbane and then Sydney, Berlin and Toronto for work.
Wow.
And study and then Toronto for love because my husband's Canadian.
Yep.
And we were, working and living over there and we had our son, our first was born in Toronto, and we really had this moment of how much of what we're doing is for ego and how much is for this season of our life.
Yep.
Because we both had kind of these big jobs and we were working a lot, but we wanted to have a family and a really solid family life. So I wanted them to grow up in regional Queensland to have the childhood that I had.
Yep.
So it made not much professional sense for us to come back here, but it was the best move that we made because we've got a quality of life that we wouldn't have had we stayed in Toronto. And so now we have the 3 children. Yep. And when we moved back, I guess it's a big deal to move your entire family and also walk away from jobs that you've worked for your entire lives to get. And I had lobbied my husband to come back here.
Yep.
And when we moved back, there were just things that I looked around and I thought, it's not what I want.
Yep.
And I felt the responsibility because I'd got my family back here. And so I just thought, I think I can do as good a job, if not better.
Yeah.
And I think I can make a valuable contribution. And that was really the long and short of it. I stood and I got elected.
Yeah, I love that. Not only did you get elected, you got elected in a big way though as well, in both terms. So your first term and your second term. So you're the highest voted, not just incumbent, but highest voted councillor of anyone last term. And then you've replicated that again this term, haven't you?
I have.
Yeah, well done. That's so
so it
cool.
wasn't a fluke.
Yeah, it wasn't a fluke. And
take that, haters. It wasn't a fluke.
And my wife Nicole and I, we get to see a little bit of behind the scenes stuff and hear from you behind the scenes stuff about how much hard work goes into that. It's not just whacking call flutes up and going to shake hands and kiss babies. There's so much strategy and there's so much hard work, and I think that really sums up what you do. We were just talking before we got on camera about the breakfasts and the dinners and. You have to go to the opening of an envelope as a councillor and now as deputy mayor, that elevated position, I guess, there's so much to do.
There is. And the only reason that I can do it is because it comes from a place of here.
Yes. Yeah. I love that.
And who knows how long that will be for.
Yeah.
But while I'm in it, I'll, push the boat out and try my best.
Yeah.
And try to make some changes and shift the dial.
Yeah.
I'm not one to believe that. I don't think politics is something. It's not a career.
Yep.
In my opinion, it shouldn't be.
So refreshing.
I think and it is hard. It is tough going. If you are shifting the dial, it means that you are sticking your neck out, and that's going to mean you're going to get heat.
Absolutely.
And the heat means that it is hard going. So I think I've never been one that I wanted to be a seat warmer. So it was just like get in, do the thing, get out.
That's so good.
So that's why I'm doing this, I suppose.
That's so good. Well, let's get a little bit more meta Toowoomba now. So you do a lot of work with different organisations, and through your role as deputy mayor, but you represent Toowoomba and Southeast Queensland and Queensland on such a much larger scale. Tell us a little bit about that and your recent trip to Canberra, and we'll go from there.
So I represent our region, not just Toowoomba Region, but Southern Downs, Western Downs and Gundawindi on the Queensland local body, so the Local Government Association for Queensland.
Yep. And
we then, for the entire state, take policy positions to the state government.
Yep.
And we make sure that that advocacy happens in a really intentional, focused way, because a lot of the issues that we have here in Toowoomba, they have in Cairns or they have in Redlands or wherever. So that's on the state perspective, and then I was elected to also represent Queensland on the Australian Local Government Association, and same situation, but then instead you're representing the states and territories, and you bring all of those issues to the federal government.
Yeah.
So on one hand, we're positioning ourselves for state policy, and then on the other hand for federal policy, because two different bodies, two different funding situations and different responsibilities as well. So there's lots of work to be done for those two, and that's what I do as well.
How on earth do you prioritise the needs of, from a state level, from a local level, from a federal level? How do you prioritise? Is it like the squeaky wheel gets the most grease, or is there a process behind
There's
it?
a process.
Yeah.
There's a process. And I've learnt it as I've gone along because, like I said, I didn't study political science or anything like that. So I have learnt on the job.
Yeah.
But it feels like it comes very naturally to me. I get it. And I guess when you are advocating to any group, I always try to put myself in their shoes, and I always think, what's in it for them? And I have long ago given up on the idea of just appealing to like your good graces and please and for the goodness of us, because it's just not going to work. That's the reality. And so I always try to position myself in their shoes and think, what do they need to hear that will be convincing for them to then help us get this thing? And it changes depending on what the issue is, and then the way you advocate changes as well, because there's sort of, I always think of it as levels, I guess, and you don't want to like push the nuclear button straight up. Ideally, you use that very sparingly. And it is important to have relationships. Relationships is the sort of cornerstone of what I do, because people need to know that you are a reasonable person.
Yes.
Because then when you do ask for something, they know, okay, I'll listen, because she doesn't ask for this, that and the other. She's serious, and she also tells me what's in it for me when I ask for something. And so you start polite and you accelerate, I suppose, through. And so the best form of advocacy is actually probably stuff that no one ever knows about, because you are just having your conversations with, ministers either at a state or a federal level, and they're successful.
Yes.
And you don't have to then make a lot of noise about it. And that's the best case scenario, but it's not always available. And so when it doesn't work, you do have to be prepared to have some really difficult conversations. And you do have to be prepared, and it's okay. Like we've got jobs to do.
That's right. And sometimes, I love the quote, the best leaders are the ones who can have the difficult conversations, but they're the ones who, can go home and they can still sleep at night about them. And, it's part of the job, and it's part of the job being a leader and in a leadership role, which, yourself on a very different level to me, we're both blessed with being able to affect leadership and affect change in our organisation, but for you a much wider scale. But it's really cool to do. You touched on the value of relationships, and what that looks like. I think outside looking in, the current council is a really great team, and they seem to work really well together. And when I see you at events and that sort of thing, everyone really gets along and seems to work well together. How important is that piece and that teamwork piece in council?
You want to be able to have a situation where people know that they're going to be heard. And you want that because we have a diverse region and lots of moving parts. And there's lots of information that is in the minds of the people, the 11 people around that room.
Yeah.
And you need to basically mine those minds for what they know about particular pieces of information, knowing that you're not going to be the expert on everything at all.
Absolutely.
And so this term, for instance, we're doing the planning scheme.
Yep.
Which is an enormous body of work. And
huge.
And just the other day I actually said it is so great having our two newest councillors. One is in real estate.
Yep.
One has a developer background. And it's so good to be able to hear what they've got to say about things.
Yeah.
I mean, they talk about things that I would never have considered.
Absolutely.
And so you want that. You want an environment where people can agree, disagree, but just bring their perspective to the table.
Yep. No, that's awesome. Now, what are, through some of those conversations, through the new planning scheme, what can we look forward to in Toowoomba?
There's lots to look forward to if we can capitalise on our potential.
Yep.
But that doesn't happen without intentionality and focus and some hard yards.
Yep.
So, big picture, we are part of Southeast Queensland.
Yep.
And we're part of the Southeast Queensland Regional Plan, which is basically something that the state government puts out, and it is to do with population projections.
Yep.
So the state government tells us that by 2046 we're going to have a population of 225,000 people.
Wow.
And so our planning scheme has to be signed off by the state government.
Yep.
So everything we do has to be compatible with what they're telling us to do. We work in sync with them.
Yes.
And if we don't, then they won't sign off and we don't have a planning
Yeah.
scheme.
Yeah, back to square one.
So what that tells us is we have to accommodate more people.
Yep.
We have to do more approvals.
Yes.
We have to increase densification because we've got two options. We either go up or we go out.
Yeah.
And the infrastructure that accompanies those is expensive,
Yeah,
no matter which
absolutely.
way you slice it.
Yeah.
And so we have to make sure that there's enough money for the infrastructure to support either going up or going out.
Yeah.
And it's not just that. It's the thing that makes us really livable.
Yes.
We don't want to lose that. And that balance has to be struck.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of potential for us here. And the big thing that we have that Southeast Queensland certainly doesn't have is space.
Yes, absolutely. Heaps of it. And, you know, people will go, there's no land left in East Toowoomba and all that sort of stuff. But there's so much land everywhere else. And there's such an opportunity there to redevelop or to rejuvenate spaces. You know, we see it all the time through, you know, the gentrification that's gone through Newtown, for example, and Russell Street in particular. You know, you drive down Russell Street from West Street and you go, wow, there's some beautiful houses in here around St Ursule's College. And, you know, 5 years ago, that was some of the worst streets in town.
When it changes fast.
Oh, absolutely.
It's just getting that initial change.
Yeah.
We've got enormous potential with our commercial real estate.
Yep.
Exactly the same reason, because we've got space.
Yep.
And there are areas in Southeast Queensland that have their planning schemes. There's a lot of legislation around it, but basically you are supposed to plan for the future.
Yes.
And for some of those areas, they don't have space. And if we look back to what I was saying at the start, I have always seen that we need to position ourselves as a solution
Yep.
to their problem.
Yes.
Their problem is they have people coming in. They're getting 2 million people
Yep.
by 2046. So they have people coming in, and housing availability and housing affordability are pinch points for them.
Yes.
We're right here, guys.
Yeah. Here we are.
We are a solution to that problem.
Yep.
But for that to happen, we have to make sure that we have enough water and that we are connected properly. And when I talk about being connected, I mean in terms of being able to easily move into southeast Queensland.
Yep.
But I also mean like in terms of internet connectivity.
Yep.
Making sure that you can do business fast here and that's not an impediment. So that's the connectivity is a word that cuts a few ways.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's so important. And you would obviously have access to the data behind why that's important. And, you know, we just see it from a buyer perspective or a tenant perspective. And just like you guys have moved from Toronto back to the Darling Downs, you know, we're seeing people, you know, over the last 18 months, we've seen the largest regional migration in Australia's history. Not a lot of people understand that. They understand, you know, yeah, there's people who used to live in the capital cities, but now they live in regional areas. But no, it's the largest regional migration in the history of Australia, from the capital cities to areas like Toowoomba. And we see people living in Toowoomba now because they can rent a house for a fraction of the price that they'd rent the same sort of house in Brisbane or the Gold Coast or Sunshine Coast for. And sometimes they even commute to Brisbane 2 or 3 days a week, which is just amazing. And it's a story that I think pre-pandemic you would never have heard of, or it would have been really an outlier. Like, oh my goodness, you spend, you know, how long in traffic per day, per week, per month? But now it's really becoming the norm. But having Toowoomba as a place where people can call their home, do business all over the world from is such a great opportunity, and that connectivity piece is going to be so important.
I always say, I spoke to somebody this morning and he moved his family from the Gold Coast 2 months ago.
Yeah.
And I always ask, what made you move? Because I think that's important intel for us.
Yes.
And he was saying, we want a tree change. We wanted some space for the kids to grow up. And that's a pretty common story.
Absolutely.
But people don't want to trade off where they gain space and trees but lose everything else. So we've got to make sure that we are a vibrant region for them, and they don't feel like they're giving up anything. They feel like they've won the lottery because they're like, oh my goodness, we're onto the good stuff here.
That's right. Why did I wait so long to do this? Yeah, I didn't need the beach. Yeah. What on the other side of the coin, what are some of the challenges that we face as a region?
Water.
Yes.
We're in a time of plenty at the moment, but I'm, from a farm.
Yes.
And it's like this thing at the back of my head all the time that drought will come.
Yes.
And we have to be prepared for that. And the time when it is a time of plenty, that's not the time to like kick back and go, great. That's actually the time that we should be making really good long-term decisions, because if you leave it until you're in a crisis or approaching a crisis, then you don't have the luxury of time, which then means you make more expensive decisions.
Yeah.
Construction costs more when you have really tight time frames to get it done, and you pay a premium to get the labour in and all of this sort of stuff. And we shouldn't have to do it like that. We shouldn't be so reactive with things. So that's a challenge for us.
Yeah.
And I think making sure that we do the advocacy really well, making sure that we are thinking. I mean, we've got we say bold ambitions and rich traditions, but we've got to be real about those bold ambitions, and that can be hard. I mean, if we want Inland Rail to come here and be an enabler for freight and logistics, then that has to be advocated, because at the moment it's stopping. So that's having some surety for our planning and our residents, so that they know, can we invest or not. There are all of these sort of catalytic projects that would change the face of the region.
Yeah.
They take money.
A lot of it.
They take money, a lot of it, and that's a challenge for us. So we really, again, that comes back to advocacy as well, because local government across the entire country, this isn't a Toowoomba Region specific thing, this is across you talk to City of Melbourne, City of Sydney, or, over in WA, they have exactly the same issues with the pockets are shallow in local government and they get deeper as you go to state and federal.
Of course.
So we need to make sure that we are getting the funding to us for the projects that we need.
Yep.
But I think like for people who are in positions like I am, it also means articulating and having a vision and putting it out there and then pushing for it. When I think of our region, I want us to all feel like, the Pittsworths, the Crow's Nests, the Millmerrons, they have uniqueness about them, and that we want that to flourish. We want them to feel loved and included and funded at a local government level. Roads is a perennial problem for us. We've got 13,000 square kilometres, so we need to make sure that we are funding the road part well. But within the city, if we think, okay, we're going to have a lot of extra people here and we need to move them around, we have something that other cities would absolutely kill for, which is an existing rail line.
Yes.
Most cities that want to put in a rail line, it is a real headache for them because they have to do land resumptions and it is tough.
Yep.
We have that, and it goes from the north to the south. I'd love to see that turned into light rail, because at the north we've got the new hospital at the side of Bailey Henderson, and at the south we've got the university. We're going to have tens of thousands of additional people living here. Moving them conveniently is going to be really important. And so I would love to see that advanced.
Yeah.
We are having this 2-campus model for the hospital. That's the plan.
Yep.
Personally, I would love to see all of the health stuff on one site at Bailey. And then I've always thought that existing site of the base hospital is a really good place for a stadium, because it is, if that rail line is activated, it's serviced by that, and it's also serviced by West Street, James Street, major arterials.
Yep.
So you're not running into any problems with residential neighbourhoods being impinged upon and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But again, it takes money. All of these projects take money.
It takes time, takes agreements from a whole lot of stakeholders as well, I would imagine.
Correct.
Yeah.
And I think in politics is the art of the possible, and we have to make sure that we don't let perfect stand in the way of good. And
I love
that.
Yeah, that's something we say around the office all the time, is don't let the perfect get in the way of getting the job done sometimes. Because often, we can, and it's simple things often that you just get caught up in the weeds and in the minute. And it's like, look, maybe if we just try it, maybe if we just suck it and see a little bit, and let's just give it a crack. Because I think that's the Aussie way. I think that's, I just think that's the way of progress. If people wait too long, they'll miss the opportunity completely. And I'd hate for Toowoomba to miss an opportunity. Yeah, and I'm sure you feel exactly the same.
Correct.
In the same vein as challenges, we deal with a lot of developers, a lot of interstate and international investors trying to invest money in the region. And we constantly find we're up against a fair bit of red tape compared to other councils, other local governments in Queensland, in Australia. Can you tell me, is there a reason for that? I'm sure you cop this all the time, but is there a reason for that? And if so, what is that reason? So we have a little bit of ammunition to go back to these people with.
I think there's two parts to it. So not all legislation is bad.
Yep.
Some of it is there because it is to mitigate risk, and it is to protect people, and it's to protect the public purse. Ratepayers' money is public funds. So some of it is there to make sure that people are safe.
Yep.
And that people's money that they pay in rates is safe.
Yeah.
We have heard loud and clear that there are things that can be improved on. And I think that it's probably no secret that this term of council, that is a real push for this term of council. And central to that is something that I, again, really believe in, which is we are in competition. We're in competition with Logan. We're in competition with the Sunny Coast. We're in competition with Gladstone. We're in competition. We don't win just by mere existing.
Yes, absolutely.
So we've got to be competitive.
Yep.
And I don't want us to have a reputation of anything other than they're good to do business with.
Yeah.
Things take time to change.
Yes.
But the message has been received loud and clear, and I'm actually optimistic that there's going to be some change that's going to be seen.
That's great. Is that something that we're seeing in like a new town plan, or is it a bit bigger than that?
I think it's a cultural thing first and foremost, and then I think that it manifests in things such as planning scheme and all of the other bylaws that fall out of what council does.
Yeah, I love that. I'm so glad that there's optimism there, especially from someone in your position. And obviously, there's as many other fingers in the pie who then you have to get agreements from, and there's such a massive cultural shift that has to occur, and that's no small feat. So credit to you for leading that and being an advocate for that. So.
Each of us is one of 11 around that table, and nothing happens without the will of the majority.
Yep.
But I do just sense a mood.
I love that. That's so good. Well, I think we're pretty well out of time, but I really appreciate you coming in and sharing your time, sharing your insights as to what the future of Toowoomba looks like, because we're hopeful, and it's super encouraging that a council is hopeful, and that we've got strong leadership in place. So thanks, Beck.
No, it's been such a pleasure.
Lovely.
I love doing this. I love talking about what we can be.
Yeah.
So thank you for having me.
You're most welcome.